Good morning, Rabbi. Good morning, Chevra.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 Prakim Rambam. We already started yesterday the new series of Paraduma. Today we are up to Prakim, Beis, Gimel, and Dalet, and starting with Hilchos Paraduma, Perek Beis. So yesterday we learned, at the end of the first chapter, we learned that being that the Tzedukim, as they always did, who since they did not accept the real interpretation that Hashem gave to the Torah, they came to various wrong conclusions, including them wrongly understanding that the words Ishtar, that the man who's involved in the making of the Paraduma, the kalim that are being used for the ashes, etc. of the Paraduma, they have to be tied on the highest level when that is not the case. True, if someone became Tamei prior to going to the mikvah, they were not allowed to be involved in the making of the Paraduma. But once that person or that keli went to the mikvah, even though you didn't yet wait for head of Shemesh, so for Truma, it's not yet tahar enough. But as long as it's tied enough for Maisa Sheni, which is, it's a Tful Yom, it went to the mikvah. It's good for Paraduma. So they dafke made the people and the Kalim Tamei on that level. That is what we learned yesterday. Now, when people observe that, they can come to the wrong conclusion that Taka, since it's not a Kachim Mizbeach, and since the whole Avodah was done outside Yerushalayim, B'chlal, we don't have to be that careful. Everything in life is a balance. So if one side is more lenient, sometimes you have to balance it, as they did over here, by adding what we call ma'alois yiseiros, or what we call harchakois gedolos, is going to be extreme stringencies that we find by Paraduma, like extreme, that we find nowhere else. And that will basically be the focus of the entire second chapter. Perek Sheni has 8 halachas, starting with halacha aleph. Says the Rambam, ma'alois yiseiros, a maila, a step, means a step up. It means a higher standard, extra stringency. Asu betaharas paraduma. And v'harchakois gedolos, right? Great extremes were taken to keep everyone and everything involved in the Paraduma away bitumas meis b'chol maser. Why? Because, like we said, so that can give the people a wrong understanding, and they can be overly lenient. So to make sure that doesn't happen, for people not to treat it lightly, the Chachamim made gewaldike mamish extreme harchakas. Now let's go. And because of that, number one, whenever they will designate the kohen who is going to be the one burning the paraduma, he doesn't right away go and do it. The they put him, they isolate him, they quarantine him in a chamber that's in the Azara. Now really, Azara can't be, because we already learned that other than a Melech B'Yisrael, Yisrael, no one is allowed to sit in the Azara. This kohen is going to be living there. In other words, that chamber, that room designated for the quarantining of the kohen involved in the Paraduma was not sanctified with the Kedusha of the Azara. It only had the Kedusha of the Harabais, but it wasn't the Shetach of the Azara. That's what it means. And what did they name that chamber? Ubeis Even Choisen Kreis. They called it the stone, the room of stone. Why? Because all of the movable items, all of the kelim were made out of stone, because stone is something that is b'chlal not shaykh to becoming tummy. And therefore, he would only use stone utensils. And someone can become tummy, unbeknownst to them. I'm tummy and I touch you many times, I can impart that tumah. So all of that was avoided. Now, halacha 2. Let me go further. If this guy would be married, if he would be allowed to be with his wife, same thing. could be his wife, would be a nida, unbeknownst to her. This is not a good picture, but it's okay. I understand what you want, Kevin. We're not there yet, and it's the wrong picture. And unbeknownst to a man, if God forbid he's having a relation with the wife as an nida, who she imparts tumah to him on her level. So that's it. There was a quarantine, separated from all people. Halacha bits. Shiva sevam kodim afrasha kodim sevas hapara. Those 7 days when we are mafrishin koin asay place me beisoy mamish the way we're mafresh the koin gadol to avoid Yom Kippurim. Dover zekavol Moshe Rabbeinu b'chem mafrishin oisemi ishtayas. We mentioned she doesn't move in with him. Shamatim sanida v'yeitam shiva sayamim. Now this lishka, where was it? Troya Yoshiva Kala Shiva was Sfainis Mizrachis Chaisa. It was in the northern eastern part. Again, as we mentioned, I know that it's part of the temple complex. It did not have the kedusha of the Azara. But why did they make a dafka in the north? To remind them that it is called a chatos. And chatos, which is in the category of kachim kachim, higher kedusha, can only be slaughtered in the tzafin. Even though this para was not even shechted b'chlal in the temple, it wasn't shechted in Yerushalayim. So that already was merames that there's something unique and holy about the paraduma. Now, we mentioned this is something similar to what they did to the Kohen Gadol, 7 days quarantining. We're going to see that something here happened even more. Halacha dal. B'chol yoim mishivas yimei ha'afrasha mazon olav mechatos. On every one, really it's not every one, it's 6 out of the 7, they would sprinkle on him the ashes of prior red heifers. Why? Because maybe he is Tamei Meis and he doesn't know about it. Now guys, if you remember, by the Kohen Gadol, 7 days before Yom Kippur, same concept, they quarantine the Kohen Gadol. They also sprinkle on the Kohen Gadol from the ashes of the red heifer, but they don't do it every day, or really, as we'll see, 6 of the 7, they don't do that. By the Kohen Gadol, they do it on the 3rd day of his being quarantined, and on the 4th day, which is Erev Yom Kippur. And that's enough. Now, even if someone became Tamei with a maze a month ago, you don't have to sprinkle the water on the 3rd day. What we do need by the sprinkling of the ashes of the red heifer, as we'll see soon in the subsequent chapters, that the 7th is only valid if it's done, if the 1st was done on the 3rd. In other words, there has to be 4 days between the 1st sprinkling and the 2nd. But between the Tumah and the sprinkling of the 3rd day, it means minimum 3 days. But it can be 4 days, it can be 4 months, it can be 4 years. Nevertheless, and by the Kohen Gadol Erev Yom Kippur, there was no other way to do it. You couldn't do it every single day because, as we'll speak out in a moment, we're not allowed to sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer on Erev Shabbos. On Shabbos. Cannot sprinkle it on Shabbos. And Yom Kippur every year falls out on another day of the week. So you cannot control what day of the week the Kohen Gadol will be quarantined. For you to say it's going to work out, just never do it on Shabbos. And here we could make it work by sprinkling the ashes on every day, which is what we do. Why is that? Because there is one opinion that says, Asbos, that you have to sprinkle it dafka on the 3rd day from Tumah. You have to sprinkle it on the Tamei. If Tamei today is Wednesday, if someone becomes Tamei today, then Thursday is number 1, Friday is number 2. Theoretically, Shabbos, you would have the ashes sprinkled, which you can't do on Shabbos. You sprinkle the ashes, and now guys, let's just do this by heart. If we're going to say that unbeknownst to the Kohen Gadol, he became Tamei b'Tamei Meis, and let's go with the most chamudik opinion that it has to be dafka 3rd day of the 7 clean days. Well, maybe day number 1 of the quarantine, maybe that day is the 3rd day. Maybe day number 2 is the 3rd day. Maybe day number 3, that's the 3rd day. No, it's 3 days prior to quarantining him, he became Tamei b'Tamei Meis. Now, the 4th day is certainly not a day that he has to be sprinkled because he's already in that chamber for 3 days. No, it's the 4th day of the quarantining cannot be day number 3 from becoming Tamei. No, he's there. You're going to ask, maybe day number 4 of the quarantine is 7 days from when he became Tamei. It could be, but it wouldn't help anyways because everyone agrees that the sprinkling on the 7th day is only something to be done if prior to it 4 days, he had it sprinkled on the 3rd day. If you didn't have it sprinkled then, sprinkling it on the seventh day is nothing. So day number 4, mimanav shach, it's not shaykh for you to sprinkle on. Day number 5, if day number 1 was day number 3, then day number 5 is day number 7. So Taka is sprinkling him every day other than the 4th day, is covering all the bases. And now let's compound it together. Not like Yom Kippur, we don't control what day of the week is Yom Kippur. Here you have to separate him, quarantine him 7 days before. They always quarantine them on Wednesday. Because Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, which is a day that you cannot sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer, is Shabbos. So it works perfectly. Let's read it inside. Because mimanav shach, it's not shaykh for there to be such a need. Can't be shlishi litumasi because he's already quarantined for 3 days. It cannot be shvi'i, maybe it's the 7th day. Even if it is the 7th day, since they did not sprinkle the ashes on him the day Erev, they quarantine him. Prior to that. So finished. Only if on the 3rd day of the Tumah, or 4 days prior to the 7th, he had some sprinkling done to him. Gewaldig. Now, just like the Kohen Gadol Erev Yom Kippur, they did not do it every 6 days out of the 7 days. Because like we mentioned, we paskin that no matter when a person becomes Tameh, you can begin at any time later to count 7 days. On the 3rd day sprinkle, and on the 7th day. 2 days would have been enough. Is one of those extra stringencies. Okay, halacha hey. But Aviyah Shabbos, always on Wednesday was the weekday that they initiated this week of quarantine. In order for the 4th day, right? If Wednesday is day number one, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos is day number 4. Because since you cannot sprinkle on Shabbos, and that's something that we learned, my friends, in El Shabbos Perek Chav Gimel, just like Kalim may not be taken to the mikvah on Shabbos, I'm not talking about Hasidim going to the mikvah. That we do. But Kalim are not to be taken to the mikvah on Shabbos because you're fixing them. This level of fixing is not done on Shabbos by sprinkling. So it works out perfect. If the quarantine begins on Wednesday, Shabbos will be the 4th day. So you get every day other than Shabbos the Hazor. Halachavav. All of these 6 days. Now guys, this is going to blow your mind. Wow. As we will learn, God willing, today, every time we burnt a red heifer, after we raked all of the ashes together, the ashes were divided into 3 different piles. One of them was stored in the Beis Hamikdash, in the area known as the Chayil. Now, where are those ashes today? That's a good question. It's probably somewhere there. What were those ashes used? Listen to this, my friends. They would use, we had, as we'll see also today, up until now, 9 red heifers. Now let's go up until the time that we only had 6. Even if we're burning now the 7th, that means that there were prior 6. We are sprinkling on this Kohen Gadol every day of the 6 out of the 7, the ashes of the red heifer. Every day of the 6 days, we sprinkled from another one of the red heifers. Why? Another chumrah. That doesn't make a difference. Now, if they only had the ashes of one, good. Oh, it's not something that's essential. Halacha number 7. Now, this is mamash. It goes from a chumrah. These chumras are unheard of. Whoever is doing the sprinkling, just to know our rule, whoever is sprinkling the ashes must be pure from corpse tumah. So now let's go. Let's open our minds to all possibilities. L'chumra. Maybe the guy that's sprinkling the ashes is Tami L'Tamei Meis. He doesn't know about it. So you're going to say, okay, no problem. Quarantine the guy that's going to sprinkle the ashes on the coin that's going to shechtenu paraduma also for 7 days. And during those 7 days, have someone else sprinkle him. That doesn't work. Because maybe that someone else is also tamei l'tmei meis, unbeknownst to him. So there's no limit to it. Now, halachically, do you have to be concerned of such a small possibility? No. This is called a chumrah. But how do you answer this chumrah? Maybe everyone is tamei. The only way to answer it is when women are pregnant, they should give birth to babies in locations that no matter, even if someone was buried underneath there, as we learned, the moment you have a vacuum of a tefach by a tefach, right, it keeps the tumah down. That was the attempted picture of Kevan. So there would be areas in Yerushalayim built on platforms that there, even if someone is buried underneath it, you will not be tamei. These children were raised until they were 8 years old there. And they were the ones that did the sprinkling. They for sure are not tamei. Like Gewalt. Halacha 7. Only on someone that we know never became tamei. Because this rule is a rule. The one who's doing the sprinkling has to be taught.
They never left the house?
They never left that area. It wasn't the house cave, and it was probably a little neighborhood. Yeah. And that's why we're normal. We remain normal. You understand? My father says beautiful that his parents of blessed memory, they moved from Poland to Brazil in the 30s. And they raised 7 children. They're all frum. He says, we're not all normal, but we all stayed frum. Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh. So that the guy that's going to sprinkle should undergo a hazah. So the Rambam says, no, that doesn't for sure cover all the possibilities. Maybe the guy that sprinkled in was not taught. There's no end to it. Now in halacha, you don't have to be concerned about this, but we're trying to add stringencies. So this is what they did. And that's, by the way, that's not only concerning the person, the kelim that are used to fill the water up, as we'll see soon. You have to have mayim chayim, umekachin, and in it they put the ashes. So those waters are now sanctified. Those kelim were not kelim taken to a mikveh. Maybe those kelim after the mikveh went over an area where someone was buried. Those kelim must have been made out of a material that can never halachically become tamei. Kulam klei avanamoyu she'em mekablim tuma. Now, you say the same sha'asu. Now, how is it possible that you can find a person that we know for sure that never became tamei with corpse tuma? To that says that Rambam there were certain courtyards. See, cave not houses. The courtyards are larger areas. You can have a whole square block. Your universe is the whole block. That's it. First of all, to begin with, it was built over a stone. Because what's the concern? Maybe someone was buried. If there's a large natural stone in the ground, the likelihood that someone is buried underneath it to begin with is very small. Maybe 4,000 years ago, right after the Mabul, someone was buried there. Okay, so they would hew out of the stone an area of a tefach, height of a tefach, and only on top of that did they build a platform. So even if someone is buried under the stone, the tumah gets stuck there. That's the tachteim chalu, in case there's kever atohim. And they would bring over there nashim ubaris, pregnant women, and they would only give birth there. Now I know that the Rambam doesn't write until what age, but I know from Mishnayos, those children were raised until they were 8. And even a minor is okay, is kosher to do the sprinkling. Now we just mentioned that in the chayil, they had the ashes of all of the prior pradadumas. But those ashes were just ashes. For you to use them, they have to be added into mayim chayim. You have to go get spring water. So now they would go get spring water. There would be other such children, same one, other ones that were born there that we know for sure were never tamei. They would be the ones even getting the water. Now, what does it help for you to live your whole life in such a courtyard? When you go to get the water, you might become tamei when you're going to get it. So as we learned, animals make a chatzitza from tuma. Adam and kalim meviim and chaytzitzim. That's what we learned in the previous series. So these are your young children. So if you bring a very fat ox, a very fat ox means that when you're sitting on the ox, even your legs are not protruding beyond the widest part of their stomachs. And even more than that, they would put a board on top of the ox. On top of that sat the child. So he's completely removed. Even if the ox is going to be walking over a place where someone was buried, the tumah cannot go through. Dafka oxen, because again, you want to make sure that the bodies are wide, the animal is wide. No human body part should go beyond it. And on top of that, they would put doors. Because of the possibility, the small possibility that someone is buried there unbeknownst to anyone. The koiser shall have beyadam, also the kalim that they're going to use to draw the water, it's going to be stone kalim, and they're going to go to the spring water called the Shiluach, which is a small stream that's slightly to the south of Harabayas. Now, when they came to the Shiluach, how do you get the water? So in the Shnais, actually, there's one opinion that says that they tie the keli to a rope and they lower it into the water. That far we don't paskin, because no one is buried under the body, under the bed of water, under a river. That chashash, we don't go that far. So Yordam Sham, they actually can get off their oxen, they go into the river, and and then once their kalim of stone are filled with water, they go back up and they sit on top of these doors and they go back to Harabayas. The moment they come to Harabayas, now they were not raised in Harabayas. They were raised in those chatzeros. Harabayas, once they come to Harabayas, they can get off these animals. Maybe someone was buried under Harabayas. Taka, we have that chashash. You're right. But what we did is when we built the second temple, now don't forget, Chai, this is only Bizman Bayesheni. Because the whole thing, these extra chunas, was to counter the leniencies that we made against the Tzedukim. The Tzedukim only began Bizman Bayesheni. During that time, the Bayesheni was built many times, just to make that clear. It wasn't built once. It was built and rebuilt, and Hurdus really rebuilt it. But at some point, they elevated the entire mountain by building double arches, as we'll speak out in a moment. Here arches. They made everything hollow. And on top of a hollow area, they built a platform upon which they had the Harabayas floor, the Asara floor. So even if someone was buried underneath it, no one would become tummy. And now they can walk until the door of the Azara. When they would come to the door to the Azara, it's really the Chayil prior to the Azara. You had over there the Kolol Shal Efer. Like we mentioned, you had pictures of ashes from all of the prior Paradumas. These children, they would take some of the Efer and they would put it in the water that's in the cups. More details about this we'll learn in the subsequent chapters. And then now they would sprinkle it on the Kohen. That's the one designated that's now in quarantine to eventually burn the new Paraduma. Now, another detail. They would take them weiter to the mikvah. They must go to the mikvah. Because they were born on these courtyards. Prior to sprinkling, maybe while they were in the courtyard, maybe they touched a dead rodent. Maybe a woman that was in need to touch them. You have other possible tumas. So there they went to the mikvah again. And since these mikvahs were already over this platform, in other words, they went to the mikvah in a location that they're not going to become contaminated there from tumas meis. Final halach of this chapter, halach ches. Another big chumrah. If something now is tummy, you take it to the mikvah, start. As we learned in the third chapter of Chagiga, not so when it comes already to Truma, when it comes to Kachin. If something is tummy and you take it to the mikvah, and you had in mind, I'm taking this for the mikvah to be allowed to use it for Truma. Even if you know for sure it did not become tummy again, you're not allowed to use it for Kachin. In other words, you have to have in mind for what did you take it to the mikvah. So we are extending that way of thinking over here. That this child that was taken to the mikvah, lo yamala b'kelev tin of achar, another child cannot use those kelim, even though the kelim were taken to the mikvah, because it was taken to the mikvah to be used by child A, not by child B. Or tinoik shetavel hazal coins, that child that went to the mikvah to sprinkle on this coin cannot sprinkle on another coin. If for whatever reason they changed kohanim. In other words, you have to have specific kavanah. What is being toiveled for what? And if you deviate, you have to go to the mikvah again. Mamash, like we learned over there in Chagiga. Chen kelim shetiharam lachatozu. Ubnei Yodam shetiharam lachatozu. Lo yisasid ma paracheres. The person or the keli that's taken to the mikvah, you have a kavan, it's being taken to the mikvah for that kohen to shech this paraduma. And if anything changed, you got to go to the mikvah again. And everything we learned in this chapter is milus. You say this b'para. It's called the extra standards that we make. B'para aduma, as the Rambam began the chapter, to balance the wrong perceived havamina that people can have. Oh, it's done by its full yain, so we don't have to be that chamer. Oh, do we have to be chamer? Beautiful. Today's second chapter, which is the third chapter of Paraduma. Now we're going to go into the details. Where was the para burned? Exactly how did they burn it? Exactly what was added to it? All of this we have in Parshas Chukas. What was said when they added those three things, as we'll see, the Ezoiv, the Eitz Erez, the Shnei Toila'as, what was said when they added it, etc., etc. The third chapter has 4 halachas, beginning with halacha Aleph. Ein sarfen es apara, elo chutz laharabayis. It's not only that it doesn't need to be done on harabayis, it may not be done on harabayis. Shenemer, as it says, v'hoitzi oisa el michutz lamachla. It's interesting because really we know, right? It has to be taken out of Yerushalayim. Nevertheless, the Rambam begins by speaking about harabayis. Where did they do it? Ubahar hamishcha hoya sarfen oison. They would burn it on what we call today Har HaZeisim, which was the Rambam calls the mount of oil. Har HaMishcha. Kevesh, Hoya Oisem Harabayis Har HaMishcha, a unique ram, that's a good picture, was built from Harabayis straight into the location of where they burnt it on Har HaZeisim. Now, under this ram, now you have the double arches. But keep in. Why did you have double arches? You see, on Harabayis, we never spoke about the double arches. Maybe it was not there. Maybe now we're going to explain it. What are we trying to prevent? Maybe someone 4,000 years ago was buried over there, walking over it to Masoil. So what are you going to say? Just build a ramp. Have it built on arches, because when you have an arch, you have a lot of hollow space. We need a hollow space, as we learned in the previous series, because you have to have a tefach width and a tefach height of empty space for the tumah to get stuck there. And by the way, when you have an arch, even though the extremities of the arch come near the ground, but we already learned by the tent, if you remember, that since in the top area, in the middle area, you have a tefach height, so everything, all of the tumah gets stuck, no matter which part under the arch it is. But there's one problem. We learned yesterday, I think, towards the end, what happens if there's tumah buried directly under a pillar? There, since it's not under the hollow, but it's directly under one of the side pillars, the tumah is going to go through the pillar. So if you have a bridge built on these arches, if we're going to the small possibilities, if someone or enough of a mace was buried mamish under the solid of the sides of the arches, then when you walk over it, that's called tumah etzutza, because for oil you'll become tummy. So the only way to solve that is to build double set of arches, one on top of the other, but the legs of the top arch are over the hollow of the arches underneath it. So no matter where the mace might be buried, there will always be a tefach by a tefach by a tefach of hollow earth space under the floor, under the bridge upon which you're walking. That's the pshat. Keepin. The kippah, I'll call shnei kippin. Kedei shiyor shnei ragli akippah. I'll gag shnei kippin shetachteon. Kedei shiyor tachas hachel cholo. As we just explained by art, and that's to take away that small list of possibilities that you don't halachically have to be concerned about, but we choose to be very strict about of kever hatoim. This is not only concerning the arch. See, when the kohen brought the water to Harabayis On Harabayis, it's covered. Now you're taking it to a place in Haramishcha. Okay, shkoyach that you're building a ramp. But what happens when you get there? So that area, which is a relatively large area, also was built underneath a cholol. Now, I want to say about the cholol also in the previous chapter, I don't think cholol has to mean arches, because if you have a solid stone, all you need to do is hew out, chisel out a tefach of the stone, and it's stronger stone. You don't need an arch. You understand? You don't need a double arch, because if anyone was ever buried under the stone, the moment you come to the tefach airspace, the tumah gets stuck there. That's called cholol. If you don't have a stone, then you build a double arch. Now, the chol hamisadim b'sreifasa are going to be going out of Harabayis to the Haramishcha on top of this ramp. This was not a cheap ramp to build. Whoever knows Yerushalayim and HaKodesh. And by the way, neither was the Paraduma. It's only that this was not something that was done every single day. As we're going to learn today, how many Paradumas were made up until now. Halacha beis. So first of all, the detail of the building of the ramp and the preparing of the location in Haramishcha. Halacha beis, Ketzat Sarfa Noisa, how was it burned? So here we go. Ziknei Yisrael. No, there was a big procession. Yudafka got the elders. Hoya Magdimin Beragleim Haramishcha. They would go first. And the Beis Tefillah HaYasham, there was a mikveh there. And the Kohen, the one that was quarantined in the last chapter, and the Hamisadim B'Sreifasa, everyone that's involved in the help of burning it, and the Prada go on in the Kevesh, and they come to Haramishcha. And as we learned, not in Pedic Beis, but in Pedic Aleph, to make it clear that the Tzedukim have it wrong, they were then Metrama the Kohen. Just imagine how many milas they did, having a child raised for 8 years of his life, and now they made him tummy. Now they didn't make him tummy, God forbid, with Tumas Meis, but they made him tummy. And also the elders would lean their hands on the Kohen. Now, why would the elders lean their hands? So there's a whole shmooze over here. You see, people, if they didn't go through these big milas, a person can be a tummy. If I'm tummy and I lean on you, I make you tummy in many cases, right? Even if I'm tummy to make mace, could be to make mace. That means I'm enough. If I touch you, I make you a rishon, which is perfect. Perfect meaning you go to the mikvah now you're the tful yoim, which is exactly what he wanted. So let's understand pshat that the reason why they leaned their hands on this kohen is if they did not have a source of tumah to be metama the kohen, then the zekanim would assume the role of being the source of tumah. And they would tell him, tvoil achas. Now, I don't know what the emphasis of achas means. I know what it means. Literally, it means go under the water once. Should go under the water once. Either only one immersion is needed, not two immersions. Okay, that's what they told. As we learned in the first chapter, doesn't have to be done by a kohen head yet, even though the first para aduma was not done by a kohen gadol. Then they would speak to him more respectfully. They would tell him, Ishi kohen gadol tfoil achas. And after they told him what to do, so now he became tamei. Yarad, he goes down. The tavel, and he goes into the mikvah. The Allah, and he goes up. Then he stapag, and he dries himself. We mentioned this when we learned the halachas of Yom Kippurim. Since, as we learned in Pedic Aleph, you have to wear the Dalet Big Day Kahuna, including all of the halachas that there cannot be a chatzitza between your body and the begadim. If you are not properly dried, the water creates a chatzitza. So we have to emphasize he must dry himself. Now, there were wood that was arranged, but we want to have wood that's very flammable. What types of woods? It was arazim, it was cedar wood, it was aloinim, oak wood, uveroshim, pine wood. Interestingly, if you remember, the Chazal tell us that you have 10 types of cedar woods. We had that in Gemara twice, that I remember. These are all included in Erez. Just to know, pines is a subcategory. So they had different, now this is not the Erez that we're going to learn about in a moment, but they had woods from which they made the pyre from these three woods, and va'atzei te'ena, but by atzei te'ena, which they use, if you remember, for the mizbeach, it's very good, it's very dry, but they made sure that it's chalaka. Chalaka means it's not knotty, you don't have holes in it. They got the best wood for burning. Now, next, they they would make a maracha. Unlike the maracha they made on the Mizbeach, that was straight up, it was like a box up. This maracha was built the way many people envision a pyre. It was migdal. Migdal means that the bottom, the lower part was wider, a tower. And as you go up, that's the way I understand. And they had made sure that there are proper windows in it, because the more oxygen can go into the fire, the greater the fire would be. Another detail, whenever you make windows in a pyre, like where do you begin beginning it from? If you make a pyre, I'm sure there are ways of making a pyre that when you finish, it's closed from all the sides. Here, they wanted for you to see that there's an open part. The open part of the pyre into which they'll put the para was dafka b'mairav. Why b'mairav? Guys, just to know, Har HaMishcha is lemizracha shel Yerushalayim. That means that when you are standing on Har HaZeisim, the Holy Temple is to your west. And everything was done in a way that there was a visual between the place of the Shechita and the burning and the Hazah. Straight, you can push it, see into Har HaBayis. Like whoever goes today to Har HaMishcha, many people have relatives that are interred there. So some parts of Har HaZeisim, taka faces Yerushalayim, you see the makam of the Beis Hamikdash. Exactly, somewhere there is where they did this avodah. Now, they would tie up what rope would they use? See, everything. It's called magag, is a certain type of grass, and they would put the para on top of the pyre. Everything was meduyak. In what position? The head was taka facing south. In other words, the head south, the tail north. But even we have this also many times in the Beis Hamikdash by Karbanis. There's a question is head, tail. But even if the animal is facing north-south, the direction of the animal, the length of the animal is north-south. But they would turn the head of the animal to face Mike. The kohen is standing lemizrach. That means the kohen was not standing in between the cow and the makam hamikdash. The kohen was standing behind it. The kohen is facing direct the makam hamikdash, which is mairav. The kohen has to use yaminai, and that is consistent with the rule that in the Beis Hamikdash by kachim you do the avodah biyaminai. But let's not forget, guys, that the paraduma is not kachim mizbeach. And here's you'll see a big. Therefore, the kohen was makabel the dam in his left hand. If you remember, in the Beis Hamikdash, first of all, dam is always received in a keli. The only one exception we lose, only one exception is the asham of a mitzvah. And by the way, the asham of the mitzvah is not only received in the hand. The asham of a mitzvah is received in a keli and in a hand. But the hand that's being used has to be yad yamin. Here, not only are you not using a keli, this is the only trivia that you're shechting. It's not kachim mizbeach, but the Torah calls it achatas. The kohen receives it. Now, the advantage of having the blood in your left hand is that since you're doing the hazoya must be done b'yad yamin. So now he's already in the position of using his right index finger to do the hazoya. And by the asham, if you remember, you have to transfer the blood. Here, there's no transferring the blood. Umaze betzboy hayamanis min adam, that's already in his kapay asmalis sheva pa'amim, and he sprinkles it towards. It's interesting. You don't say towards the makom hamikdash, but you have to use the words kachim. I'll call hazoya. For every sprinkle, you have to dip your finger again into blood. Similar to kachim, the shirayim on your finger is invalid. So when you have a keli, what did we learn over there in Avodah? He would smear his finger like by the chatas on the edges of the mizrach. Here there's no mizrach. But you don't smear it on your hand, you smear it on the animal itself. The animal was not slaughtered yet, guys. I'm sorry, the animal was just slaughtered. So now you smear your finger on the carcass. Now I know that it's interesting, you set up a pyre, it's so perfect. They shechted the animal on the pyre. That means it was a certain collapse already. But say there. But there's still plenty of arranged wood around it. After the hazoy like we said, after he smeared his hand, now you shechted it on the pyre. Not on the tip of the marachet. It collapses. But you're standing on wood. He was already standing on these woods. Now the kohen steps down from this marachet, and the hitzis esoesh be'etzim katan. When you light a pyre, today you have something called fluid, fire, whatever, starter, liquid. They didn't have it then. We didn't need it. So you start a fire by using small woods, be'etzim ketanim, and you would put it not on the top, you put it on the bottom because fire goes up. And the kaschilo eishba. Merachik means not a mile away. He has to be careful not to get burnt. But umeshamer, he's there close enough to make sure achiyitzas es ho'ur beruba. And what normally would happen, see, when it says a migdal, I don't know if this picture is correct. We're just looking at a picture. I think that is more or less the way it looked on the Mizbeach, even though the logs on the Mizbeach were not circular. Here they are. I think it went in a lot. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is that when you have a lot of heat, it naturally makes the belly of the animal burst open, which is ideally what we wanted to do. We're going to learn later, if they cut it open itself, it doesn't matter. But he's making sure that everything is there, and v'tikara bitna. It's the belly rips open from the gewaldige heat. And now that the belly is opened, see these deep. Now you go back into the chumash. There are three things that have to be added in the fire, in the burning cow. One is eitz eres, a branch of a cedar, and the amount of number two, the azoiv, and azoiv, a certain type of herb, hyssop, ein pachos mitefach. Ein pachos means you can add more, just not less. And then wool that's dyed with toilas. Now I know whenever that's called shni toilas. The word toilas means a worm. The Rambam here, and he doesn't have to write it in any other place. We'll see soon. It's not a worm, even though people say toilas means a worm. It's not a worm. It was a certain type of herb that had very red berries. And beteva, guys, every berry had a worm in it. The blood, it's not from the blood of the worm. It's that the sap of those red berries were very red, and they were used for dye. They called that plant toilaas because it was infested with worms. Okay, just to make that clear. The Rambam will say in a moment. How much of tzemer? At least the weight of 5 saloim. He writes in the bottom, that's around 100 grams of weight. Now, the kohen, we had this in other avodas as well. You know where we had this? We had this when they would cut the sa'orim. Remember? The night of the 16th. So here, he would announce, he would ask, eitz eres, before he threw it in, is this eitz eres? You know what you have to announce it? Like we mentioned, there are 10 types of trees that are called eres. He wanted everyone to agree this is eres. But he didn't ask it once. Eitz eres? Everyone would say yes. I don't know why the Rambam doesn't write it on the Seder. He would ask again, eitz erizeh? Everyone would say yes. He would ask 3 times. You'll see in a moment. The response was in between each time. And similarly, when he would pick up the azoiv, he would ask not once, azoiv zeh, azoiv zeh, azoiv zeh. The third ingredient, shni toilazeh, shni toilazeh, shni toilazeh. Sholosh pa'amim al kol echad v'echad. He would ask 3 for each one of these 3, and everyone would answer hin, 3 times for each one. 3 times, in other words, 9 times.
After everybody breaks?
No. They only, the cow needed to come to a place, ideally, from the heat that the belly burst open. After, because the Torah says the throat el toich sreifas. That's where you in. Does it have to hit inside of the animal? No, we'll see in a moment. It's very hot there.
He took the wood out of the marathon.
No. Very good. So Rabbi Chen just wants to point out, even though the Rambam writes that some of the woods could have been eitz eres, were arazim, no, that's something else. That's the pie. Aside of that, like the pie, if the pie was only made with atzei ta'ina, you're good. That's not so meduik. They just wanted to make a pie that's really going to burn well. The key was it should be filled, it should be dry wood, it should not be knotty wood, it should not be crackling. The wood is burning. Now you take eitz eres, Ezoy shni toilas. And the lekol kach lama. Why do you have to ask 3 times? Lefi, I'm sorry, see, I said eres is 10. I stand corrected. 7. Shemine arozim shivahem. And mine ezov arba'ah. Now, is the Rambam saying, the Rambam is going to write in a moment which one of the 4 you used. The Rambam doesn't write which one of the eres. Point is that once you have many subcategories, when people look at one, let's say if I think, many people don't know, guys, that pine tree could be called Atzei Shitim. Pine tree is a very common tree. It's also a very cheap tree. All mountainous areas naturally have pines everywhere. So when you ask, is this eres? And people say yes, like this, that's the 3 times. And one guy said, no, that's pine. So another guy said, no, you learned the Gemara. Pine is also eres. It's to make sure that people don't, I'm not lost. They can say, that wasn't correct.
So you can use any of these 7?
I think so. I'm not sure. I know by Ezav he's going to say which one to use. And now, when it comes to any wool that's dyed red, in the days of old, they had dyes. I know today everything is synthetic, but there's certain natural dyes. So many people have something called pua. There's another thing called laka. These are 2 other sources aside of the toila'as that would give you the same red look. You want everyone to know this was dyed with toilas. Now, what's toilas? I know the word toilas means a worm. It's kaval de karamam today. No, it's not a worm. So he says like this: but toilas, he hagargarim ho'adumim biyoser. There are small little berries that are very red. These berries look like carob seeds, if that helps you. And vehem kamoy ha'oig. It's like sumach. That helps you. Sumak.
The Persian food.
It's Persian food. Okay, I don't know what this is, but it's a dark, that color. And now, why is it called toilas? It's a berry. So the Rambam explains, because the toilas, kamoyatush yesh b'chol gar mehem. These little seeds have worms in them. But just to know, the dye is not coming from the blood. I know sometimes, I think I even said it. It's good to remember. It's not that. It's a berry. It's a little berala that is dye, that the sap of the berry dyes it red, and there are worms in them.
You have to make sure there's a worm in there?
I don't think so. I think people called it toilas because it was infested. I think that's what it means, David. In other words, it can be any one of the 7. That's the way I understand it. But not everyone knows it. So when you ask 3 times, it's the time for people to, if anyone there is going to say it's not, if you just do it without speaking about it, people are going to say in their mind, so they made a mistake. And that's $1 million mistake after the paraduma they paid for and the ramp that they made. Okay.
There is also acacia wood?
Let's see, because you learn Hasidus and you learn the English of the Hasidus. I'm telling you, there's 7 types of Ezra. I don't know why, I think somewhere in Chazal it's 10. I remember learning this because it's the 7 emotions or it's the 10 spheres or something about Eres. Okay. What Ezoiv? The ones that Balabatim eat, and the one that they add as tavlin in their dishes, if that helps you. I have on my desk a little oil of Ezoiv, of Hisa. Okay, someone gave it to me. All of these 3 are ma'akvan zeh. Another detail, they didn't throw it in separately. You know what they did? Ezoiv is a little grass. It's short little plant. So the Erez and the Ho'ezoiv, Imo Erez, are tied together with the wool that's dyed shani. You understand? So they would take these 2 things. I think it was not Harashi. Erez is arrogance, right? The gross, and Ezoiv is humble. You would bring them together, tied with the red string, and you would throw it. No. Interesting how important red was. People associate red with Gevura. I mean, that's true. Rebbe's shofar bag was red. Imagine on the day that we don't want Hashem to be sitting al kisei din, something about red. And they would throw it into the belly. Now, another detail. Once the majority of the para is burnt, you can't call it para anymore. But on the other hand, I'm sorry. If the majority is not burning, it's not called sreifas apara. At least the roiv has to catch fire. On the other hand, very quickly it's going to become ashes. Once it's ashes, it's not sreifas apara. So that's your window. It has to be roiv burning before it turns into ashes. And if you throw it too early or too late, baiter psulam, shenem al toich sreifas. Now, bein shishlech shlosum ka'achas, as we ideally mentioned, you should tie the two together with the red string. Another detail, it's very difficult when something is burning. You're throwing it in the belly and the burst open. No, even if you throw it in the body, or whether you throw it in the fire. Another detail, that every belly of the animal burst open. Sometimes yes, sometimes not. And then you threw it in, or it had to be open. What happens if it's not bursting open? So they can take a long knife and open it up. I don't know who would stick their hands in. The bottom line is, if it's open, it's when the roiv of the potter is on fire, it's not ash yet, the belly is burst open. Halacha 3. So after it's fully burned, they would beat whatever is remaining with clubs. Why would they beat it? We know this, guys, when something is very burnt up, if we want to get as much ashes as we could. Everything is valid, but we don't want to have shtikalach. They're burned, they're shard. But when you beat it, you make everything into ashes. It meaning not only the para, it's good, you can get a lot of ashes. You can beat all of the atzei amaracha that was burnt with it. All of that is valid ashes. And the koiver and esakol bikvarois. No, it's after it's beaten. Now you have a huge ash pile. How do you gather it? You gather it with rakes. They raked it up, and we'll see, and they divided it into 3 different kelim. Now, was there something around it to prevent the wind from taking half the ashes? Rabbi Zajac is asking, was there something around it? Maybe they did not do it on a windy day. Doesn't write about anything like that. And also, the bigger the pyre you made, you got a lot of ashes. I want to say something. I'll say it right now. That Rambam is going to write here in this chapter that we had so far 9 paradumas. And the big question is, and the Rambam writes, the first one was done by Moshe Rabbeinu, and the second and the subsequent 8 were done by Ezra and by Yesheni. So it's very strange, because guys, from Moshe Rabbeinu until by Yesheni, you have almost 1,000 years. Now, does that mean that they only needed one because fewer people became Tamei Mace? It's not 1 versus 2, it's 1 versus 8. Or maybe it means that Moshe Rabbeinu, he made a pyre until the Shemayim. It's not just the ashes of the potter. So that's why I appreciate your question about the wind. In other words, if you really want to stretch each one for as long as you could, and if you make a pyre that's like a 50-story tall, then all of that is good.
It was like the Rebbe's wine.
Or it was like the Rebbe's wine. Very good. Very good. Okay. And any black part, right? A black meaning it's charred meat.
So all the
charred wood.
All the ash from the wood itself.
It's good. It's good.
With
That's my point. In other words, all that. In other words, that's the beauty. That clearly, any black part, whether it's from the meat, whether it's from the wood, all of that was beat. In other words, sometimes something is burnt, but you want to chop it, you want to get the most out of it. They would beat it. Now, if something had no ash in it, for whatever reason, maybe something like a bone, I don't know, maybe something gets, just there's no moisture. If it's not ashy, then they would leave it there. Maybe that's why they used rakes. It's not, when you don't use rakes, that everything is gathered. When you use a rake, you see what you're gathering. Gather all the ashes. Okay. Now, even if the bone was not burned, either with a bone, in the Rahman al-Islam, the people that have the riches of doing cremation, you know what the people get? They don't get the body. The body is nothing left of the body. They get it's ground bone. It's not ashes. It's a shekel. What people are given by those Rishoyim is mamash. It's pulverized bone. That's also valid over here. Lahavdo. In other words, the bone doesn't have to be burned. If the bone is beaten down into a powder, which is what happens, because it doesn't burn. I know from cremation. That's also good. A final halachah ein machnisin klum efrei laniach ba'azara. Shenemar v'yiniach michutz lamachna. First of all, none of it ever went into the azara. We mentioned before, right in today's first chapter, second chapter, that there would be ashes. We'll see those ashes were in the chayil. They were divided into 3 parts. One of them was placed in the chayil, and it's mashma that it's still there. You have to know where to look, unless our enemies found it, God forbid. The echad is left on haram mishcha, and the other one is used for all of the Yidden. And how did it get to the all Yidden? It was divided up to all the mishmaris. Now like this, the ones that were mischalik l'chol hamishmaros was only used for kahana. The ones that were left on Hara Mishcha, from those ashes, all the Yidden who needed to be purified were purified. From the third, which is a big amount that was left in the Chayil, it stays forever. Now, when the Rambam wrote before, if I'm not mistaken, or when we learned this in Shkolim, that the Efer of the Moshe Rabbeinu's para is put together with the Aron HaKodesh, that says that's only Renegayim, the Ephod of Moshe Rabbeinu. It fits because Bisman Bayis Rishon, they did not burn a single paraduma. They had the offer of Moshe Rabbeinu. So whenever we hit it with the Holy Ark, with the Shaman HaMishchan, the Makal Aaron, that was only of Moshe Rabbeinu. But Bisman Bayis Sheni, they hit it. And Halavai will find it. Maybe we found it already. Every single para they hit it in the chayil. Now the Rambam writes, until Mashiach, 9 were done.
There's 9 jugs of it.
So they're 1 with the Aron Kodesh, and there should be 8 in the chayil, somewhere hidden in the area of the chayil. And this is the proportion: 1 Moshe Rabbeinu. And that was good until we built the second Beis Hamikdash. Shnia was made by Ezra. It's also interesting that we're not putting Ezra together with everyone else. It's like a melech by himself. Moshe, Ezra, and then 7. Now, those 7 came right after him. The Sheva Ezra Ad Churban Habayis. So that 1 and 7, Chapt 9. V'asidis Yasser HaMelech HaMoshiach Meheira Yigola Amin Kein Yiratzoin. And I had the merit to be in 770 when the Rebbe spoke a Sicha about, the Rambam is a Sefer Halachas. The Rambam is teaching 2 things over here. So by writing the temple will be done by Mashiach, that's a halach. But Meheira Yagala is teaching you that whenever you speak about Mashiach, even though the Rambam here is not focusing on Hilchas of Mashiach, we're not learning Hilchas Malachim, Perek Yud Aleph. We're learning Hilchas Paraduma. So Mashiach is brought as a B'derech Hagav. A Yid right away should say Meheira Yagala, because there has to be the Kivinu Kol Hayoim. And everyone else should say, Amen Ken Yiratzoin, Yuvaldik. And today's final chapter, the 4th chapter of Paraduma, we're going to go into more details. What are you looking at, Dovi? It's missing something?
There's a note that's missing on the bottom, right at the end there.
There's a note on the days, there's no longer
Okay.
Does it say how much they used to sprinkle?
We're going to learn later. Very little was needed. We're going to learn later. In other words, again, the proportion is strange. 1 to 8. Okay. Guys, more details about the Paraduma, and we're going to learn another nuance about the details. If you remember, we learned this a few times together in the Gemara. There are certain words used in the Torah that connotes how Seder is essential. Not all the steps, but the Seder of the steps. Whenever the Torah uses the words Chukah, that's one of the, then everything is Ma'akev. And since the Torah uses the words Chukas Oilam, therefore, we're going to go over not only everything needs to be done, everything needs to be done in the order that we prescribed. Now, we learned in today's first chapter on Perek Beis, the Milas Yiseidas that are unbelievable. There are at least some leniencies relative to Kachem Mizbeach, and we're going to learn them very few in this chapter. This chapter has 18 halachas, beginning with halacha Aleph. First of all, Ein Sheichlen Shtei Pares Adumas Ka'achas, because it says V'shachat Oisa B'loshin Yochid, not Oisam. Now, why would you even think that someone is getting such a waste of money? Let's apply this in a more practical way, halacha base. If a cow doesn't move, if an animal doesn't move, one of the techniques that were used to get an animal to move is get a second animal, a chaver of the animal, that is walking, and the stubborn one is going to follow the other one. You can't use that technique over here. And as we learned in the previous chapter, you're taking the paraduma, you're beginning on Harabais. You're walking over the ram to Haramishcha. The para doesn't want to move. So Ein Moitzi and Ima. You can't take another cow with it, not a black cow, not a red cow. If you're going to take a black cow, people are going to look, they're going to see a procession, they're going to see a black one and a red one. They might say, oh, they're going to shech the black one. Can't take another red one because of halacha aleph. Not just, since you cannot shech 2 animals together, so what do? You got to deal with the stubborn behema. Halacha give Let's go back to the first Mishnah in Zvachim. It's when you shecht ashlamim l'shem chatos, right? Here we're speaking about when the kohen is shechting the paraduma. Let's say he's having in mind this is l'shem oila, that machshava, or when he was mekabel the dam in his left hand, or when he springs l'shalei l'shma, or if there's a double kavana, either first l'shma and then l'shalei l'shma, or shalei l'shma and then l'shma. All right, oy shenasis without a kohen, or the kohen was not wearing the dalad big day kohuna, or it was done by the kohen gadol wearing the shmona megadim, or if it was done by big day chayil, all of these psula. Psula means the paraduma is invalid. What? Shchata al manas lechol mepsara. If you have in mind that you're going to eat the meat, or you have in mind you're going to drink the blood, here it's kesheda. Why? Because the Torah doesn't use the words reyach mechayich. Now the irony is that such a machshava, right? Such a machshava is a machlokes Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer. According to the way that Rambam paskins, even by a regular carbon, if someone has in mind to drink the blood, which is not meant to be drunk, it doesn't pass it. The chiddush that Rambam wants to make is that Rabbi Eliezer, it would pass by korbanos on the mizbeach. Even Rabbi Eliezer, not over here. Halacha da. Keep it on Mekli, not on the left hand. Psula. I want you to understand, psula doesn't mean, oops, and now if there's still dam hanefesh, let me be makabel. Throughout, psula means now this paradum is invalid. Done. Shenema v'lokach elazar hakohen midama be'etzba'oi. Mitzvah yad, v'loi mitzvahs kli. It's not so pashut. How is that mashma? But let's go back. Halachei.
When it said before that if they found something wrong with one of the cows, they would transfer to another.
They found a more beautiful one. They wouldn't try. They can redeem it. They can redeem it. No problem.
They said they don't take two, so they would do that exchange before.
No. I think the halacha aleph is just to explain why you cannot use the technique for halacha base. Because if you have an animal that's not moving, you can't take another animal with it. That's all he's saying. Halacha. He's a bit clean. Even only one of the 7 times the haza'asoi psula. He's a achas mehen b'smoiloi. Imagine. Psula. He's a shiva kahana masiyasam ke'echad. If 7 kohanim wanted to be involved, if they all sprinkled at the same time, psula, but at least one episode, one leeway. If they sprinkled one after the other, then it's okay. Now I want to add something. We learned in today's first chapter in Perek Beis, the kohen would quarantine. If you wanted to have 7 kohanim involved in the sprinkling, they all underwent the same quarantine. Halacha, right? We're in the middle of halacha. Hey, he's like even if he sprinkled the blood, but he did not direct it mamish towards the heichal. Before, what did we learn in the last chapter? Kodesh kachim. I don't know the nuance of the word. It should be consistent. He's not. Psula. Psula means the pot is puzzle. However, we're going to qualify that in a moment. It's not as bad as it sounds in a moment. If it was not shechted in the area on Harazesim from which you can see, Harazesim is a mountain. Also, psula sheneva v'shachat oisel afanav. Now, halacha v'ba med dvarim amurim shehiza oisarav oishachat keneged hadorim and keneged hatzafim. So it's when are you invalid is if you pick the wrong place of Harazesim, or if the kohen, they shechted the cow on the makom of Harazesim that faces Harabayis, but the kohen was mamish facing the opposite direction. Because the kohen was facing east, then it's takapasul. But if the kohen is standing b'mizrach lamaydev, right, upanat keneged hechol, if he's standing in the right direction, the cow is in the right part of the mountain. Elama, while he's sprinkling the blood, he's not aiming towards the heichel. That's fine. That's called keneged the heichel. Halacha. Even only one of the 7. Psula. Another detail. Travel shtayim. If he dips his finger in twice, guys, listen to this, and he sprinkles once, his hazoya is psula. Guys, all of this is because of the words chukas olam. That's the rule. Chukas olam means whenever the Torah writes chuk is ma'akev. Now, if he dipped it once and he spritzed it twice, even though he didn't even think about sprinkling it twice, it was done without kavana. Ela travel v'hizacheres, and he compensated. Hazuyasa psula oigaval. Ketzad. Told us why it's philosishis. It invalidates everything. Everything. So he dipped his finger, it's the 6th time. By the 6th time, once, and then it should have been a 7th and the 7th. By the 6th, he did once, twice. Visa Shishu Shviz, even though he dipped his finger again and he sprinkled the 7th time, as a Yosef Psula. Now, what happens?
That's a Yosef Psula, which means the carbon's up.
So again, so Rabbi Chen is pointing that out. I know I spent some time on this yesterday. I'm not clear. It sounded to me from, I used the Rambam La'am. He emphasizes that the whole part is Psula. Again, it could be Rabbi Chen is right, because the Rambam also doesn't write every time Hazi Yosef Psula. Sometimes he writes Hazi Yosef Psula. Sometimes he writes Psula. Okay, I'll leave that open question. He's a Matfilah Shviz, Ushminis. Oh, now it's already different, because now you did the 7th. Now you added. See, adding won't be a problem. Sometimes. Adding sometimes won't be a problem. Because once you did 7 times, okay, adding is okay. Ain't a clue. You know when? You know when we don't care if he did it 8th time? If every claim was doing another sprinkling. If the same claim, which I'm sure was the norm, did all the sprinklings, even if he added once, also not good. The guy that burnt it, if he added psula, why? So we're going to learn in a moment that if a kohen, anyone involved, is doing any type of avodah, which means you are occupied in anything other than what you're doing. So when Mashiach's times with technology, if a kohen is going to go with his stupid phone and he's going to text, everything is possible. It's not because he added. It's because what are you doing? After the hazoya, you have to light it on fire. We learned, and after that, you have to put the items in it. All until when the ashes are ready, no one involved can be doing anything other than it. Halacha 8. From the area of the maracha, and then you sprinkled it outside of it. It's possible. And psula means the paras psula. Halacha test. He's even one. I feel he's a sheish by yom, and the final one was done by night. Psula. Halacha yud. Shchota chutz mimakim sreifasam. She shechted it outside the place where it was meant to be burned. In other words, you are facing haram mishcha. But like we said, you bring the cow on the marach. You didn't do that. Even if you're going to bring the body later on the marach. Afilu shchata. So you upgraded. I shechted at least the animal in Yerushalayim and HaKodesh. Psula. Halach yidal. Srafa chutz mimarach toshen ishchat aleom. You shechted it outside the area of the maracha. Oy shechalok al shnayim. Right, you burnt it outside of that area. Or if you divided the animal into 2 and you made 2 marachos, oy shesarav shtayim b'maracha achas. 2 para adumais. That's time, not 2 kahanim, Danny. 2 para adumais, just like we began this chapter, that you cannot shech 2 together, you cannot burn 2 together. Everything is invalid. The im achar shenasis efed. If after it became ashes, then, I mean, wrongfully, but another para aduma was brought and burned. Now we're ready, at least Baruch Hashem. Some leniencies, doesn't warn.
How does he come with all these pasulas, Rabbi? How does he know all this? I'm sorry. Some of them he's quoting this pasuk or that pasuk. What is
amazing,
the rest of it?
Amazing. We began learning Rambam. I think this cycle was like Boimer, right? The Rambam wrote so many halachas. What's kosher, what's puzzle. Now, Kevin, you're waking up and asking, how did the Rambam know? I don't chap.
Well, after he quotes,
like, good morning. Okay, Maita, Yud Beis. The Rambam. I mean, it's somewhere in the oral Torah that Rambam knew it all in his mind. That was written. None of it was he made up. That's the point. Somewhere. Okay, halacha Yud Beis. Kevin, one day when you'll become more learned, you'll write a little footnote on every line where the source is. But I'm sure there's a source. Halacha Yud Beis. Hifshita. Now, you burned the whole thing. If this kohen skinned it and he cut it into pieces, which, by the way, is what's done by the karbanos, and then he burnt it, it's okay. But it's only okay if you burnt all of it. If any part was missing, even from its waist, oy gevalt, psula. When we also learned this in the series of the burning things on the mizbeach, burning kacham on the mizbeach. when something is on a fire, sometimes the heat of the fire expels something that's on it or in it. So if a piece of the hide was pakad off the fire, off the smaracha, or a piece of the flesh, even a piece of the hair, if it's in the amount of a kazayis or more, you have to bring it back. And if you don't bring it back, it's puzzle. Now, paka chutz lemarachta. So I want to say like this, that there is the general place where the pyre was prepared, and then there's the pyre proper. Okay, Danny, just not to be confused. The Rambam La'am explains it that way. Whoever's using a Chayenu will read footnote 3. He quotes the Rambam La'am and he explains it that way. No, it's the chutz lemarachta. Marbe all of a sort chutz lemarachta means, Danny, it's in the general area. It's in the general area, but it's not on the pyre. So all you do is you extend, you understand, if it's not beyond that location, now how do you define that location? I don't know. But since it's in the location, so add wood and burn it over there. Paka mekarnel. So before we spoke about a piece of the hide, a piece of the flesh. Now, if after everything is on the fire, a horn piece was expelled off, a hoof was expelled off, some of the waste was expelled off, that even in the size of a kazayas, thank God. Now we learned everything has to be done during the day. But what happens if you shechted during the day, you did the hazor during the day, Danny, and you b'chal didn't burn it? Amachai. Thank God it's not possible. You can burn it tomorrow. And everything has to be done a day, but overnighting it doesn't invalidate it. Because it's not kachim mizbeach. Lefikach im nishchata hayoim. And the he's a domikol chasei during the day, like we said, even the 7th cannot be done at night. Everything was done during the day, but for whatever reason they b'chlal didn't burn it. It sat, the remains sat on the mokim hamarachim. The nisan falamacher baruch Hashem ksheram. Halacha yudal tzrafa oinein. An oinen cannot do the avoida, but an oinen didn't. Or a mechusar kippurim, right? The Zav Mitzvah and Yeledes prior to bringing the Karbanis here, it's kosher. You know why? Because at full Yom can do the Avodah. So for sure, they are less problematic than at full Yom. Halacha Tezvav when it comes to kosher. If the Kohen was doing the Avodah, Taka Hara Mishcha. But if he didn't do prior to this Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim Psula, Ipnei Shemaseh Ke'ein Avodah. Now the question is, the answer is, guys, we begin the procession from the Beis Hamikdash. In the Beis Hamikdash, and then basically they walk over the bridge that we learned in the previous chapter. Now, the im kidesh bachutz, even from a clay choil, even from a small earthenware utensil, which is not chashuv, post facto kosher. Why? Logically, the Rambam says. Here, where did the Rambam learn it? The Rambam gives a logic. Because since the bottom line is all of the avodah is done by chutz, so you can't say that the kiddush that was done by chutz will invalidate it. But again, the Rambam begins by saying that ideally he does the kiddush inside the Beis Hamikdash. What's the normal rule, guys? We learned this before in avodah that whenever the kohen gadol went to a mikvah, even though he was mekadosh yadayim v'raglayim, remember, once he does kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, it's good. But there are certain things that demand from him to do it again. One of them is having to go to the mikvah. Here, after the mikvah, ein tzarach lachzor lekadesh. Hoyel b'chol masel b'tfulei yoim. That's why we don't have that high of a standard. You don't need that additional kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Halacha tezayim. Now, what happens if you burn the paraduma shaloi be'etzim? You know how you do that, my friends? You burn the animal itself. Especially today, you can just set the animal aflame. Oi, with any type of wood, not with the 3 types of woods that ideally are the 4 types of woods that the Rama mentioned. Or even if you lit it with kash and gavava. It's all ksheira. Umitzvasa shelo yimayit la eitzim neroyela. In other words, mitzvasa means like the better way is to make sure that you have a lot of wood. Because if you're going to use the, a straw is very flammable, but it burns up very quick. We want for everything to come to ashes. On the contrary, in other words, what the Rambam is writing is, in other words, all other materials are kosher, meaning aside of doing the ideal, right, which is what we learned in the beginning of Perek, it was somewhere in Perek Gimel, right, that they would put arozim and aloinim and beroishim and atzei te'ena, add a lot of flammable material. We spoke this out in the previous chapter. Since the remains of all of the fuel, all of the wood, is going to be good for the afer, why not get the most out of one paraduma? So the more you add, the more ashes you're going to have. And furthermore, it's while it's burning, it's not like, if you didn't put it before, you can't add. Add. As long as it's burning, add. If you can only add, only until when the potter turns into ash. Now, once the potter turns into ashes, then you're mixing. The Rambam doesn't write what will be the din. We're going to learn about that later. But efer mikla means some ashes from burnt chulin into the efer potter. But as long as the potter is not fully ash, you can even add. Begin with a big pyre, add flammables, add in late. Number 2, it has to only be done by zichrei kahuna. Number 3, we just mentioned it before regarding the added sprinkling. Malacha means any occupation, anything that your mind is set to do, that you're doing. Everyone that's mesasik in the potter may not be doing anything until it turns into ash. But once it turns into ash, now what did we learn? We learned that they would rake it. What happens if they didn't rake it up yet? They didn't gather it yet. That doesn't matter. Or if they gather it at night, it doesn't matter. It's all of the yoim is only until ash. Or if it was not zichrei kohuna, it was gathered by a woman. Or while you were gathering it, the guy was texting something at the same time, doing something at the same time. Now it doesn't matter. But all of these, the avodah ended when it turns into ashes. Is b'chol adam Yisrael chutz micheres shoyte v'katan. Interestingly, it means he said an isha, but not a cheres shenemar v'asav ish tahar. And interestingly, mechlal she'ein tzarich koyin. Many times ish is to exclude an isha, not over here. Uke'ilu amar adam tahar bein ish ubein isha. How did the Rambam know that? Because that's what his teacher taught him. That this ish is not excluding a woman. No, how do you know it from B'shachat Oisa? That this B'shachat Oisa that apparently is superfluous, and not only while you shechting is just a mushal. While you're shechting it, and while you're doing any other part up until when it turned into ashes, the ganze meises psalam. The Neman, it says, "B'sarav esapar of le'enov." What does be'enov mean? That's kavana. Enov means you enov ba. That's the iker. L'lamed sh'amalocha peselas ba misha shchita achet yasa efer. V'chol ha'oisik b'sreifasa. And ha'oisik means anyone. There are many people that were helping. Anyone there that did any melacha cheres, salah achet yasa efer. Final halacha yudches shachar esapara. And at the same time, or a dalas was cut with it. In other words, guys, you did not perform a separate act. You have a very long knife. You're doing the act of movement, right? And at that same time, something else is being cut. That was not your kavanah. It happened. So not you added to your maisa, nor you had kavanah, that's already okay. And you can argue, who cares? But you didn't have kavanah. Do you know that for shchitas chulin you need no kavanah? Means your act was effective. Because of the rule, we don't say since your act affected something good, it's considered a malacha. Malacha means you did an extra action for something else. You did not do an extra action, and you did not intend for this double action. But if you only did one meiser, but you also, that's great. I'm cutting the neck and I'm cutting something. Even though it's one action. To be continued. Yes. Yes.
While they're burning the para aduma, they notice it's not going to be done before it's nightfall. Do they continue or do they stop?
So like this, so when they stopped the whole, from the very few leniencies we learned today, Kevin, it's not pasulina. But now, I know that blood will congeal. I don't know how practical it is. But if the blood did not congeal, as long as
the spray has to be done
by day, all of it. So, no, the Rambam's example of psulina for Kevin's question was they shechted it and they sprinkled it, but they didn't burn it yet. Now it's night, burn it tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi.
As long as the steps
you sit on the pyre
during the night, yeah.
Go ahead, Rabbi.